Hello and welcome back to Read Becca. We are going to wrap up yet another of my Booktube Prize books. This is Brickmakers by Selva Almada and translated from Spanish by Annie McDermott. I read this for the 2022 Booktube Prize for the Translated Fiction Finals round. Now, this is an Argentinian book. It is from an Argentinian author and the setting is in near past historical Argentina. So this is really spoiled by the synopsis on the back. I would say basically all of the key plot points are laid out there, but it's hard to spoil this because so much of the plot is about how it's told. So we are starting from the end, really. The first chapter is opening with Pajaro and Marciano, who are two neighbor boys, basically young men, and they are lying on the ground looking up at the Ferris wheel at a carnival, dying. So that's the end, is their death. And we jump back in time to see how they got there, what the past is in the story. So over the course of this novel, we are beginning from their fathers before either of them were born. Their fathers as neighbors and both running their own brickmaking businesses, effectively. Oddly, it seems like they're in a small town, yet they have multiple brickmakers. I don't know. It's meant to imply this very working class struggle, is what I got from it. But for reasons not to do with brickmaking, they become rivals and have a feud. So there's this ongoing familial feud between the families, and that is what really drives this progression toward the end with these two young men dying. But in the midst of this, as they're growing up and they're rejecting their father's hatred of each other and finding the problems with their father's attitudes, Pajaro is gay, and Angelito, Marciano's younger brother, is also gay, and they end up finding love with each other. So this turns into a Romeo and Juliet sort of story where two children of feuding families, in this case two young gay men, find love with each other, and it gets crushed by this ongoing rivalry and hatred that has grown out of these fathers' rivalry. So ultimately, I hated this book. I just didn't want to read it. I thought it was well written from a craft perspective, but everything about the plot and characters was just not something I wanted to read. This is effectively a book about shitty men being shitty and poisoning everything around them. And the back expresses it this way. It says, in Brickmakers, Almada furthers her extraordinary exploration of masculinity and the realities of working class rural life. So my feeling is, do we really need more of that? I feel that shitty men are taking up so much air in the literary world, stories of them anyway, that, you know, obviously there is room for more of everything. This is not a pie that we need to slice up, and this is taking away from the existence of other great things, but like, I don't understand why something like this is on this list. So I had major problems with that, just with the aspect of, this is something we have seen so much. We've seen an excess of this type of story and character of these men who are awful. We take this story that could have been a really painful and poignant focus of a gay perspective and instead centered this straight man who is hateful and gross. And I just didn't like that. I think in the knowledge that this novel was published in 2013 originally, I think that probably is the explanation for it, but it doesn't make me happy to be reading this now. I think in 2013, we probably were much more in a literary space of trauma gaze stories that were taking a view of the straight perspective outside, because there was this idea that maybe gayness was too unrelatable to write from that lens. And we've moved forward since then, I think. So, or I hope, I should say. So yeah, I just hated that aspect of it. I also specifically didn't understand that it's referenced in the author bio that she's specifically a feminist intellectual. The women characters in here are not fully formed characters at all. Women entirely exist in here as body parts being fondled. The wives of these horrible men exist to be sympathetic to their husband and nothing else. At one point, one of the women, like, her husband is legitimately an awful, awful, horrible man. And she's like, oh gosh, my husband, he just gets into fights so much. And, you know, she's worried about, well, what if something happens to him? Then it'll just be me and the kids. You know, like, so she's there constantly being subservient and giving everything up of herself. And we don't ever learn anything about her as a person, really. She's just there to feel bad for her husband as he is antagonizing and ruining their lives, basically. So yeah, I didn't find anything sympathetic for myself in anybody in these books at all. I would say as well, just on kind of the back end of things that I hated, this had a ton of really graphic violence, and specifically really graphic animal cruelty and death. And like, to the point I would have DNF'd this. This book is not a book I would have finished if I weren't reading it for the Booktube Prize. So this was a hard sell for me, and I just found very little to like about it. It is very competently written, so I can kind of see why, you know, maybe people voted it to make it to the final, but this is just not something I see as being of our current time and pushing current boundaries. It feels like this might have been award worthy in the time that it was originally written, but we've moved on in terms of acceptance of homosexuality and the homosexual perspective, and I think we could have done this better today. So yeah, I just had too many problems with this, and it is one of the books I've read for the prize that I liked the very least. So that is it for Brickmakers, I think. Thanks so much for watching.